Hey guys, so we're moving on to the next lesson in Unit 10, and this lesson is all about operations with complex numbers. So now we're going to learn how to add when we have imaginary numbers or complex numbers, and subtract when we have imaginary, and even multiply. Okay, so first, when we're adding imaginary numbers, basically all we're going to do, or subtracting, sorry. When we're adding or subtracting imaginary numbers, basically all we're going to do is we're going to combine like terms. Okay? So if it has an I with it, it's a like term. If it doesn't have an I with it, it's not a like term. We're just going to add them as they are. So with that being said, we have in the first equation, -1 minus 6 is -7, and I plus 2I is 3I. So our final answer here is -7 plus 3I. Okay? In the second one, we have -2 minus 3, which is -2 minus 3, which is -5. And pay attention to here, we've got -4I. And remember, the negative symbol, if it's on the outside of the parentheses, has to come on the inside. So it becomes -4I minus 5I. And -4 minus 5 is -9I. And there's our final answer, -5 minus 9I. So when we're adding and subtracting complex numbers, we're just going to combine like terms. When we're multiplying complex numbers, we're going to FOIL. So now we're looking at something a little more complex. If you remember how to FOIL, or something to keep in mind when you're foiling with complex numbers, is that remember, I is the square root of -1. So when you square the square root of something, it really just gets rid of the square root. So that means I squared is -1. Okay? So now when we look at this, we have to remember that I squared is -1. Okay? So first let's FOIL. So if you recall how to FOIL, remember we do first, outer, inner, last, and then we put it all together. So first terms, we have 3 times 4, which is 12. And then outer terms, we've got 3 times I, which is just 3I. Inner terms, we've got 2I and 4, which is just 8I. And last terms, we've got 2I and I, which if I multiply those together becomes 2I squared. Okay? But again, remember I squared is -1. So my I squared here is going to turn into a -1. So 2 times -1 is -2. So my last term should actually be -2. Now let's string them all together. If we string them all together, we have 12 plus 3I plus 8I minus 2. Combine like terms. 12 minus 2 is 10, and 3I plus 8I is 11I. So our final answer here is 10 plus 11I. And that's doing the foiling. Okay, so let's try the next one. If I FOIL without having to write them out, I'll use colors this time to show you the FOIL. So first terms, we've got 2 times 2, which is 4. Outer terms, we've got 2 times -3I, which is -6I. Inner terms, we've got 3I times 2, which is +6I. And last terms, we have 3I times -3I, which is -9I squared. But remember, I squared is -1. So immediately I'm going to change this to -9 times -1 becomes +9 at the end here. And then if I just put all the rest together, I've still got the 4 minus 6I plus 6I plus 9. Notice that the inside here, negative 6i, if I combine those right off the back, they go away. So they're actually gone. They cancel each other out. So all I'm left with is 4 plus 9, which is 13. So our final answer here is 13. So sometimes it will come out to be a complex number, and then sometimes it will come out to be a nice number. In the next part of Unit 10, Day 2, we're going to simplify a power of I. So in order to solve more complex problems with imaginary numbers, it's useful to take a look at the powers of the imaginary number. Okay, so remember, I itself is the square root of negative 1. Okay, so if I raise I to the first power, then obviously I to the first power is the square root of negative 1. If I raise I to the second power, then remember I squared is negative 1. It gets rid of the square root. If I raise it to the third power, notice that the third power gets broken down into I squared times I, and I squared is negative 1. So negative 1 times I is negative I. So I to the third power is negative I. And then if I raise it to the fourth power can be broken down into two I squareds, which are both negative 1. So negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. So I to the fourth power is 1. So it's important to summarize all these first four powers, it's important to remember what these powers all represent for numbers so that we can use them to then break down powers of complex numbers like I. So I to the first power is the square root of negative 1. I squared is negative 1. I to the third is negative I. And I to the fourth is positive 1. And then it says, note that since I to the fourth is 1, then I raised to any power that is a multiple of 4 will be equal to 1. So any power that's a multiple of 4 will be equal to 1. So that's how you simplify powers of I. What you want to do is you want to take out the highest multiple of 4 out of your complex number. So for example, let's look at these examples. We have I to the 28th power, okay? So I want to pull out the highest multiple of 4 out of I to the 28th. And if I do that, so, I should get, oh, let's see, highest multiple of 4 here would be 4 times 2 is 8, 4 times 3 is 12, 4 times 4 is 16. That doesn't come out of it. 4 times 5 is 20. That comes out of there. But then let's see, 4 times 6 is 24. And, 28, 24, and 4 times 7 is 28. So actually, this is a multiple of 4. Notice that this is a multiple of 4. So I could write this as I to the fourth to the power of 7. Because remember, way back in exponents, that you can multiply exponents when they're written as a power. So this is the same thing as I to the 28th power. And remember, I to the fourth is 1, and 1 to the 7th power is 1. Okay? So again, if it's already a multiple of 4, then you break it down to powers. Okay? If it's not already a multiple of 4, like 40i to the 45th power is not a multiple of 4, then you want to take out the biggest multiple of 4 out of there so that you can figure out what is left. So the biggest multiple of 4 that I can take out of 45 would be 44. So I would break this down to be I to the 44th power times I to the first power. Because remember, 44 plus 1, when we're adding exponents here, is 45. So this tells me that I have I to the 44th power is 1 times I. So my answer here would be I, broken down or simplified. 63, again, is not a power of 4. So I'm going to find the closest power of 4, or sorry, is not a multiple of 4, so I'm going to find the closest multiple of 4 that is by 63. So if you take 62 and divide it by 4, it doesn't go in. But if you take 60 and divide it by 4, it does go in. So I can break this down to be I to the 60th power times I to the third power, because 60 plus 3 is 63. So I to the 60th power is just 1. And then I to the third power, if we look at our power list, is negative I. So 1 times negative I is negative I. So your final answer here would be negative I. And then in the last one, we have I is equal, I to the 30th power needs to be broken down. The closest multiple of 4 I can see there is I to the 28th power times I to the second. So I to the 28th is a multiple of 4, so that's just 1, times I to the second, remember, is negative 1. So 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. And there's your final answer there. So again, you're trying to find the biggest multiple of 4 to break down the I. And if it already is a multiple of 4, remember that your answer is just 1. Okay? Any multiples of 4 for the powers, your answer is 1. Okay? All right, take your time with this and let me know if you have any questions. Good luck.